In the video on SMS Szent István, I mentioned that Austria-Hungary initiated its own naval expansion program in the early 1900s, which also resulted in the massive rise of domestic steel production and contributed to the dual monarchy's industrial development. However, the first, relatively modern ships had appeared even before the turn of the century, as Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the throne, became interested in naval power and exerted his influence to increase spending on the Kaiserliche und Königliche Kriegsmarine. This would reach extreme levels by the 1910s, but to get there, several classes of battleships had to be launched first. After 3 decades of stagnation, the 1892 budget finally allowed the construction of 3 armored ships of the Monarch class, which was a somewhat reluctant reply to the newly announced Russo-French alliance and to an increasing Russian presence in the Mediterranean. In 1895, SMS Monarch and SMS Wien were completed, followed by SMS Budapest a year later. As the focus was still on coastal defense, Chief Naval Architect Siegfried Popper designed smaller vessels, essentially a reduced version of HMS Royal Sovereign, with a displacement of around 5,900 tons, a length of 99 meters, inverted vertical triple expansion engines, 4 240mm or 9.4-inch main guns, a single anti-aircraft gun, and a belt armor of 270mm using Harvey steel. These were the first ships to use turrets. They had a crew of 469. Their maximum speed was 15.5 knots, although SMS Budapest reached 17.5 knots. As international tensions increased, it became obvious that more modern and much bigger vessels were needed for Austria-Hungary to stay relevant. Franz Josef did not care much about overseas trade, colonies, or the Dalmatian coast itself. The region was considered to be remote until 1908, when proper railway connection was established. But Franz Ferdinand, together with Albert Solomon Anselm from Rothschild, strongly supported a continued naval buildup. The latter person was the main shareholder of companies like Stabilimento Tecnico Triestino, the Wittkowitz Works, and Skoda, along with the Bank Kreditanstalt, so he saw this as a huge opportunity for expansion and for profit. The country itself benefited from this program, as naval expansion meant more jobs. At the same time, domestic products were more expensive, and most of the profits ended up in the Rothschild family. After a brief pause, the new fleet commander, Hermann von Spaun, announced an ambitious expansion program in 1899 to be completed in 10 years. The initial numbers were reduced, but still, the goal was to build 12 battleships, 8 cruisers, 32 destroyers, and 4 monitors by 1909. Due to Hungarian opposition, the plan had to be scrapped, but seeing the results of the First Sino-Japanese War and the Spanish-American War, more politicians agreed to a gradual expansion of the navy. Thus, the new Habsburg class was designed, also with 3 ships. These were the SMS Habsburg, SMS Arpad, and SMS Babenberg. They were a larger version of their Monarch-class predecessors, with a displacement of 8,800 tons, a length of 114 meters, and a maximum speed of 19 knots. Officially still designated as armored coastal defense vessels, these were Austria-Hungary's first real battleships, with 3 main guns of the same caliber and a belt armor of 180 to 220 millimeters. Their main novelty was a set of fully electric gun turrets, but for the first time, hot water and showers were also included. By 1904, all 3 ships were completed by the STT shipyard in Trieste. Despite the continued bickering between the Austrian and Hungarian parliaments, more money became available, so designing the next group of ships had already started in 1902. The Erzherzog Karl class vessels were even bigger, with a displacement of 10,500 tons, a length of 126 meters, and a maximum speed of 20.5 knots. They had a complement of 700 men, 4 main guns, still of the same caliber, but now manufactured by Škoda, newly developed 190mm or 7.5-inch secondary guns, also in fully electric turrets, and a belt armor of 210mm. The new ships were named after members of the royal family, Archdukes Karl, Friedrich, and Ferdinand Max. They were meant as a direct answer to Italy's new Regina Margherita battleship, which also received two 305mm 12-inch main guns, but a weaker armor belt of only 152mm. After some delay, either due to STT's dockyard limitations or financial constraints, by the end of 1907 all three ships were completed, and they were considered to be very good overall, although they were somewhere between small battleships and large armored cruisers. This was intentional, mainly due to financial limitations, but upon the introduction of HMS Dreadnought, and more importantly the Italian Regina Elena, it became obvious that yet another class was needed to maintain the projection of power and keep up with the main rivals. Due to serious budget cuts in 1904, von Spaun resigned, to be replaced by Rudolf Graf von Montecuccoli, who managed to build good political connections and even significantly reduce Hungarian opposition. The concept of all big guns was briefly entertained, but the argument was won by the traditionalists, who favored strong secondary armament instead. Still, the Navy's portion within the military budget increased from 7 to 10%. The new vessels would now officially be called battleships, and in the meantime, the expansion of the Trieste dockyard was also begun. Construction of the new Radetzky class commenced in 1907 as part of the latest plan, which called for 12 battleships, 4 armored cruisers, 8 scout cruisers, 18 destroyers, 36 torpedo boats, and 6 submarines. Displacement jumped to 15,000 tons, with a length of 137 meters and a speed of 20.5 knots. Main armament consisted of 4 305mm or 12-inch Škoda naval guns, with 8 240mm 9.4-inch secondary guns, a belt armor of 230mm, and an armored double bottom for better protection against mines and torpedoes. SMS Radetzky, SMS Erzherzog Franz Ferdinand, and SMS Rényi were modeled after the British King Edward VII class. They all joined the fleet by 1911 with a crew of 830 each. They maintained the old and reliable vertical triple engines, as steam turbines were considered to be too new. When Italy announced the start of construction of its first dreadnought, the Dante Alighieri, in 1908, Austria-Hungary immediately ordered a new class of battleships. This would be the Tegetov class, with 4 ships: SMS Tegetov, SMS Viribus Unitis, SMS Prinz Eugen, and SMS Szent István. Displacement jumped to 21,000 tons, length increased to 152 meters, while speed was 20 to 21 knots, with 4 steam turbines. Main armament consisted of 12 305mm 12-inch guns. Belt armor was between 150 and 280mm, while the crew consisted of almost 1,100 men. These were late dreadnoughts, but they arrived between 1912 and 1915, at a time when the first super dreadnoughts already started to appear on the scene. However, since the main rival was the Regia Marina, along with the French and Russian fleets, the Kaiserliche und Königliche Kriegsmarine was not too far behind. The main problem was that there was never enough shipyard capacity to build smaller ships in sufficient quantities, not to mention that the cost of just the first 2 Tegetovs was more than the Navy's entire budget in 1909. Due to this, the Navy's proportion in the military budget reached 25%. Ironically, these huge battleships did not do much during World War I. Apart from the bombardment of Ancona in 1915, they rarely left their main base at Pola. Grand Admiral Anton Haus despised the war and hoped it would end soon. His successor, Maximilian Jagovan, was more active, but the only major surface fleet action was planned and launched by the Navy's last commander, Admiral Miklós Horthy, and this had to be aborted due to the sudden loss of SMS Szent István. The Great War prevented the launch of the Ersatz Monarch class, which would have appeared with a displacement of 24,500 tons and a main armament of 10 350mm 14-inch guns. Horthy would go on to become Hungary's regent and head of state, while the surface fleet was taken over by the Entente powers, with most ships being scrapped in the 1920s.